Hello there, my sleepy wasteland wanderers. Tonight, we journey through the desolate beauty of the Fallout universe, where the ruins of civilization hold stories waiting to be told. I'll be your guide through these radioactive landscapes, sharing tales of survival, hope, and the quiet moments that exist even in the harshest environments. So get comfortable, dim your lights, and let the sounds of the wasteland carry you away. The gentle glow of your Pip-Boy will guide our path as we explore these forgotten places together. Now close your eyes and let your mind drift as we step into the world of Fallout, where dreams await beyond the wasteland horizon. The afternoon sun hung low in the hazy sky, its light filtering through dust-laden clouds to cast a golden glow across the broken remains of what had once been downtown Washington. Skeletal skyscrapers reached toward the heavens like the fingers of buried giants, their windows long shattered, their steel frames exposed to the elements that had spent 2 centuries trying to reclaim them for the earth. The capital wasteland stretched out in all directions, a monument to humanity's greatest failure and its stubborn persistence. Through this urban wilderness moved a solitary figure, picking a careful path among the rubble that choked what had once been busy streets. The Wanderer's leather armor bore the weathered patina of countless miles, reinforced in places with mismatched metal plates that told stories of past encounters survived. A scarf wound around the lower face provided protection from the ever-present dust, while a wide-brimmed hat shaded eyes that remained constantly alert to the wasteland's many dangers. The Pip-Boy on the Wanderer's wrist occasionally clicked as it detected fluctuations in the background radiation. Nothing dangerous, merely the omnipresent reminder of the world that had been lost. Its screen cast a soft green glow as the Wanderer consulted the device's map function, confirming position against the few landmarks that remained recognizable in this sea of destruction. According to the device, the ruins ahead had once been a financial district, the heart of pre-war commerce where towering structures had housed the offices of corporations whose names now meant nothing. Most of these buildings had collapsed during the initial bombing or in the decades since, creating canyons of rubble between those that somehow remained partially upright. Experience had taught the Wanderer that such places often contained forgotten caches of supplies, overlooked by less thorough scavengers, but also harbored dangers, ranging from structural instability to creatures that had made homes in the darkness. Ahead rose a building that had weathered the apocalypse more successfully than its neighbors. Perhaps 30 stories tall, its upper section largely intact despite the visible damage to its lower floors. Most intriguing was what the Wanderer's practiced eye recognized as deliberate modifications. Improvised bridges connecting adjacent rooftops, structural reinforcements visible along one facade, what might be a collector system arranged to capture rainwater, signs of human habitation, carefully maintained rather than the haphazard destruction typical of raider encampments. The Wanderer paused, raising weathered binoculars to study the building's upper stories. The magnified view confirmed initial impressions. Someone had established a long-term presence high above the wasteland floor. Most surprising was what appeared to be greenery visible on the rooftop, actual living plants thriving in containers and improvised growing beds. In the capital wasteland, such deliberate cultivation represented remarkable dedication and no small amount of technical knowledge. Decision made to investigate, the Wanderer approached the building's main entrance, once an imposing lobby with revolving doors, now a gaping wound in the structure's facade. Inside, sunlight filtered through broken windows and holes in the ceiling, illuminating a space where nature had begun its slow reclamation. Vines grew through cracked marble flooring, while wind-blown soil had accumulated in corners, providing foundation for hardy wasteland flora. The building's interior presented the expected challenges of pre-war structures: collapsed sections that required careful navigation, flooring that had weakened over decades of exposure, the occasional nest of radroaches that scattered at the wanderer's approach. A central stairwell offered the most promising route upward, its concrete construction having withstood the centuries better than other building components. Each floor revealed similar conditions: offices emptied of anything useful decades ago, windows open to the elements, the detritus of the old world slowly being reduced to component elements by time and weather. Occasionally, however, the wanderer noted signs of more recent human passage: cleared pathways through debris, carefully placed markers warning of structural weaknesses, arrow symbols at junctions indicating safer routes upward. After nearly an hour of steady climbing, punctuated by brief rests to check structural stability and maintain awareness of surroundings, the stairwell finally opened onto what had once been the building's top floor. Here, the evidence of habitation became unmistakable. The space had been transformed from corporate offices into a functional living area. Partitions created from salvaged materials, furniture assembled from the most intact pieces found throughout the building, storage containers organized with obvious care. Most remarkable was the system visible through windows leading to the rooftop, an elaborate arrangement of gutters, pipes, and filters designed to capture and purify rainwater. The engineering knowledge required for such construction went far beyond simple survival skills, representing accumulated expertise likely developed over years of trial and error. As the wanderer studied these impressive adaptations, a voice broke the building's silence. "That's far enough, stranger. State your business." The words came from an elderly man who stood in a doorway leading to the rooftop. Despite his apparent age, evident in white hair and deeply lined features, he held himself with the straight-backed posture of someone unwilling to surrender dignity to the passage of time. He carried a pipe rifle, not pointed directly at the visitor, but positioned for immediate use if necessary. The wanderer raised empty hands slightly in the universal wasteland gesture of non-aggressive intent. Just exploring, saw signs of habitation from below, wasn't expecting to find something like this. The old man studied his visitor with narrowed eyes, his assessment taking in details that would inform his judgment. The condition of the wanderer's equipment suggesting capability rather than desperation. The overall presentation of someone who had survived through competence rather than predation. "Most don't make it past the 15th floor," he said finally, his posture relaxing marginally, though the rifle remained ready. "Collapse on 12 usually convinces them the climb isn't worth the effort. You must have found the service stairs." "Followed your markers," the wanderer acknowledged. "Good system. Clear without being obvious to casual observers." This comment seemed to register positively with the old man, his expression softening slightly. After another moment of consideration, he lowered the rifle, though he kept it in hand. "Well, since you've made the effort to climb all this way, I suppose you've earned at least a look. I'm Nathaniel. This has been my home for longer than I care to count anymore. People call me the Wanderer," came the simple reply. Nathaniel nodded, accepting the trail name without comment. Many who traveled the Wasteland preferred the anonymity of such designations, their reasons their own. He gestured toward the doorway behind him. "Come on then. Mind your step, and don't touch anything without asking. Some of my systems are more fragile than they appear." The doorway opened onto a sight that stopped the wanderer mid-stride with genuine wonder. The building's rooftop had been transformed into a garden, not the scraggly survival crops typically found in wasteland settlements, but a carefully designed space where dozens of plant species grew in organized sections. Containers fashioned from salvaged metal and plastic held soil that looked darker and richer than the dusty ground of the capital wasteland. Irrigation lines connected to the rainwater collection system provided measured hydration to each growing bed. Most impressive were the plants themselves, flowering species whose blooms added splashes of color against the wasteland's predominant browns and grays. Leafy vegetables with a vibrant greenness, rarely seen in irradiated zones. Even small fruit-bearing bushes whose produce hung heavy on carefully supported branches. The entire arrangement was protected from the worst of the wasteland wind by screens fashioned from salvaged materials, creating a microclimate noticeably different from the dusty air of the levels below. "Remarkable," the wanderer said softly, genuine appreciation evident. Nathaniel's weathered features formed what might have been his version of a smile. 37 years of work, he said, pride clear in his voice. Started with just 3 plants I found growing in a broken concrete planter near DuPont Circle. Mutated, of course, but still recognizable as marigolds. Figured if they could survive out there, I could help them thrive up here. He moved among the growing beds with the ease of long familiarity, gesturing for the wanderer to follow a specific path that wound between the various sections. Up close, the ingenuity of his systems became even more apparent. Each container modified to provide optimal growing conditions for its specific plants, watering calibrated to individual needs. Even small labels identifying species and their particular requirements. "The soil's the real trick," Nathaniel explained, scooping a handful from one container to demonstrate its rich texture. "Took me nearly a decade to get the mixture right. Combination of composted organic matter, specific minerals to bind radioactive particles, beneficial bacteria I cultivated from pre-war samples found in a university laboratory. Plants won't grow in wasteland dust, no matter how much water you give them." The wanderer examined the soil with genuine interest, recognizing the technical knowledge and patient experimentation such development would require. "You're a scientist?" "Botanist before the war," Nathaniel confirmed, and something in the matter-of-fact delivery of this statement made the wanderer look more closely at the old man's features. What had first appeared as simply the weathering of extreme age now revealed the subtle markers of ghoulification. The uneven texture of radiation-altered skin, the unusual clarity of eyes that had witnessed the world's destruction and its aftermath. "You've been here since the bombs fell," Nathaniel completed the thought. "Used to work for an agricultural research firm headquartered in this building. Was tending my experimental rooftop plots when the sirens started. Watched the mushroom clouds from right here." His voice remained steady, though his gaze drifted momentarily toward the horizon, seeing perhaps not the wasteland of the present, but the final moments of the world that had been. "Most of my colleagues tried to evacuate, head for the vaults or government shelters. I stayed with my plants. Figured they'd need me if they were going to survive what was coming." A sound emerged that might have been a chuckle or a sigh. "Didn't expect I'd survive it too, much less change like this. But here we are." This revelation cast the rooftop garden in new light. Not merely an impressive feat of wasteland engineering, but a 2-century continuity from the world before the bombs. Seeds and cuttings preserved through nuclear fire and its aftermath. Knowledge maintained and applied despite the collapse of the civilization that had developed it. Patience that extended far beyond a normal human lifespan. As they continued through the garden, a figure emerged from what appeared to be a small greenhouse structure built against one wall. A young person, perhaps 17 or 18, wearing clothes pieced together from wasteland scavenging, but cleaner than most encountered in the capital Wasteland. They carried a container of what appeared to be seedlings, their movement halting abruptly upon noticing the visitor. "It's all right, Sam," Nathaniel called. "This is a traveler who managed to find our little sanctuary. No harm intended." The young person's wariness remained evident as they approached, studying the wanderer with the natural suspicion of someone who had learned wasteland lessons early. "You came up alone? No others with you?" "Just me," the wanderer confirmed. "I saw the garden from below, wanted to understand what I was looking at." Sam's expression remained skeptical, but they set down their container of seedlings and offered a cautious nod of greeting. "Not many people make it up here, or want to." "Sam's been with me about 6 months now," Nathaniel explained. "Found the place by accident while hiding from a raider band. Decided to stay and learn." There was clear respect in the way the younger person positioned themselves near Nathaniel, not seeking protection but demonstrating allegiance. "He's teaching me about growing things," Sam said, "about making instead of just taking. It's different from how I was living before." The dynamics between the two suggested a relationship beyond mere cohabitation, the transfer of knowledge from one generation to another, a continuity rare in the fractured society of the Wasteland. Nathaniel's centuries of experience finding a repository in someone young enough to carry it forward after he was gone. Even his ghoulified longevity having its eventual limits. "We need to finish securing the north corner before sundown," Nathaniel said to Sam. "Weather report from the Brotherhood outpost suggests we might get high winds tonight." This reminder of immediate practical concerns seemed to shift the atmosphere, Nathaniel's expression growing more focused as he turned back to the wanderer. "That's actually what's most pressing at the moment. The structural supports on the north corner have been weakening. I've been reinforcing them gradually, but there's a section I can't manage alone. The weather station is predicting a dust storm approaching from the west. If those supports fail during high winds, we could lose a third of the growing beds." The implied request hung in the air between them. Assistance needed but not directly asked for, maintaining the wasteland etiquette that recognized the value of voluntary cooperation rather than demanded help. "I've done structural work before," the wanderer offered. "Happy to take a look, see if I can help before continuing on my way." Relief visibly crossed Nathaniel's weathered features. "Appreciated. The materials are ready, just need someone stronger than these old bones to position them properly." He gestured toward the northern corner of the rooftop, where metal supports and connecting components had been organized in preparation. The work proved straightforward but physically demanding, reinforcing the building's upper corner where decades of weather exposure had weakened the original construction. The wanderer's experience with wasteland engineering complemented Nathaniel's precise knowledge of his home's needs, while Sam's nimble assistance managing tools and materials allowed the work to progress efficiently. As they labored together, conversation flowed naturally, information exchanged in the wasteland tradition of sharing knowledge that might prove useful to fellow survivors. Nathaniel described the patterns of seasonal weather he had observed changing over his centuries on the rooftop, noting the gradual shifts that suggested the planet slowly healing itself from nuclear devastation. Sam shared observations about the movements of various groups through the downtown ruins below, their territories and habits representing valuable intelligence for a traveler who would soon return to those dangerous streets. The wanderer contributed news from farther same travels, settlements establishing tentative stability in various regions of the capital Wasteland, advances in water purification techniques being developed at Project Purity, Brotherhood of Steel patrols gradually pushing back the super mutant presence that had long made downtown a no man's land for ordinary travelers. As they worked, the quality of light began to change, the afternoon sun sinking toward the jagged horizon created by downtown's ruined skyscrapers. The approaching dust storm became visible in the distance, a towering wall of particulate matter that turned the western sky an ominous amber. Its scale suggested intensity beyond the capital Wasteland's routine dust events, a major system that would bring both limited visibility and potentially damaging wind. With the physical reinforcement complete, Nathaniel directed their attention to the garden beds nearest the edge, which would face the brunt of the approaching storm. We need to secure the protective screens and make sure the irrigation lines are properly fastened. Wind like that can tear out days of work in minutes. This phase of preparation revealed another level of Nathaniel's planning. Modular screens designed to be reconfigured based on wind direction, sheltering the most vulnerable plants while allowing the sturdier species to weather the storm with minimal protection. Everything had attachment points and designated positions, the system clearly refined through decades of trial and error. As they secured the final components, the storm's leading edge reached the surrounding buildings, whistling through broken windows and vacant floors below. Dust began to swirl across the rooftop, the air taking on the distinctive metallic taste of wasteland particulates, disturbed from their resting places and carried aloft by powerful air currents. Inside, quickly, Nathaniel directed, gesturing toward the rooftop entrance that led back to the building's top floor. No point in exposing ourselves once the preparations are complete. They retreated to what had once been a corporate boardroom, now transformed into Nathaniel's living quarters. The space retained the massive table that had once hosted business decisions affecting thousands of lives, now serving as a combination workbench, dining table, and research surface. Walls that had displayed stock prices and corporate achievements now held carefully preserved botanical illustrations, planting calendars, and weather observations recorded over centuries. As darkness fell outside, Nathaniel activated lighting systems, not the harsh fluorescence of pre-war design, but softer illumination created by energy-efficient bulbs, powered by what appeared to be a combination of salvaged solar panels and wind turbines. The meal that followed was remarkable by Wasteland standards. Fresh vegetables harvested from the garden, bread made from ground grains grown in one section of the rooftop, even a small portion of hybrid fruit with an unusual purple-green coloration. Each item represented not merely food, but the triumph of knowledge and persistence over the wasteland's entropic pressures. As they ate, the storm intensified outside, wind howling around the building's upper stories and sending waves of dust against the windows. Inside, however, the atmosphere remained one of surprising comfort. The combination of adequate shelter, good food, and civil company, creating a moment of normalcy, rare in Wasteland experience. "Will your reinforcements hold?" the Wanderer asked, noting the increasing intensity of the gusts that periodically shook the windows. Nathaniel nodded confidently. "They've withstood worse. The real challenge will be clearing accumulated dust from the garden beds tomorrow. It gets into everything, disrupts the soil balance if left too long." He glanced towards Sam. "Good lesson in post-storm management waiting for you in the morning." The conversation drifted toward botanical topics, Nathaniel sharing knowledge accumulated across centuries, Sam asking perceptive questions that revealed genuine interest and developing expertise, the Wanderer contributing occasional observations from encounters with plant species in other regions of the wasteland. Throughout, The storm continued its assault on the building, testing the reinforcements they had installed while casting the shelter's comfort into sharper relief by contrast. "I'm headed toward Rivet City," the Wanderer mentioned as the evening progressed. "There's a research project there I've been asked to check on." "Ah, Dr. Lee's hydroponics work," Nathaniel said with evident interest. "I've heard reports from the few travelers who make it up here. Promising approach, though limited by available technology. Their nutrient solution formulations could be improved with some of the bacterial cultivars I've developed. I could carry information between your operation and theirs," the Wanderer offered. "Notes, observations, specific questions you'd want answered." Nathaniel's expression brightened with genuine appreciation. Collaboration at a distance, like the old days, when researchers would correspond through journals and letters. He rose and selected several handmade notebooks from a shelf. "I've documented my most successful soil remediation techniques here. Dr. Lee might find the bacterial cultivation methods particularly applicable to her hydroponics systems." He placed the notebooks on the table, his gnarled fingers resting on their covers for a moment. 2 centuries of work. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else will ever understand or continue it. Sam spoke up, voice quiet but determined. "I'm learning. I'll remember." Nathaniel turned toward his young apprentice, something softening in his weathered features. "Yes, you are, and that matters more than I can express." He returned his attention to the Wanderer. "But having this knowledge reach others working on similar challenges, that would give meaning to all these decades of isolated work. I'll make sure it reaches Dr. Lee personally," the Wanderer promised, "and bring back whatever insights or questions she might have." Morning arrived with the distinctive quality of light that follows major dust storms. Diffuse and golden as particulates lingered in the atmosphere, creating an otherworldly glow that filtered through the still intact windows. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a transformed landscape visible from the building's upper floor. Familiar landmarks had taken on new contours as dust accumulated in different patterns, while the air itself seemed temporarily cleansed of the worst contamination, creating a rare clarity of sight across the downtown ruins. Nathaniel and Sam were already assessing the garden when the Wanderer joined them on the rooftop. True to Nathaniel's prediction, sections of growing beds had accumulated a layer of fine dust, some younger plants bent but not broken by the wind's force, irrigation lines displaced in a few areas but largely intact. The reinforcements they had installed had held perfectly, protecting the garden's core from what might otherwise have been devastating damage. An impressive legacy, the Wanderer observed, gesturing toward the garden expanse. 2 centuries of knowledge and persistence visible in every plant. Nathaniel straightened from where he had been carefully brushing dust from tomato leaves, something like pride briefly overcoming his usual practical focus. "It's why I stayed after the bombs, why I continue despite everything. The world broke, but life continues, adapts, finds ways to persist if given even the smallest opportunity." He gestured toward a particularly vibrant section of flowering plants. These are direct descendants of what grew here before the war. Different now, of course, had to change to survive the new conditions, but connected by an unbroken line to the world that was. Continuity matters, especially when so much has been lost. As the Wanderer prepared to depart, Nathaniel offered a small cloth bundle. "For your journey," he explained. "Some of yesterday's harvest, plus seeds from several vegetable varieties that have proven particularly resistant to radiation. Dr. Lee might find them useful for comparison with her own stock." Sam approached with a request of their own. "When you come back, if you happen to pass through the Anacostia area, my little brother might still be at a settlement called River Point. His name is Daniel. If you see him, could you tell him I'm okay, that I found a good place?" The wanderer accepted both the bundle and the message with appropriate care, each representing something precious in the wasteland: sustenance and human connection, practical survival and emotional well-being, intertwined as they so often were in this harsh world. With farewells exchanged, the wanderer began the descent through the building. Each floor passed, revealing the stark contrast between the carefully maintained sanctuary above and the abandoned desolation that characterized most of the capital Wasteland structures. A testament to what focused human attention could preserve when applied consistently over time. Reaching ground level, the wanderer emerged once more into the wasteland proper, adjusting to the transition from the relative security of Nathaniel's domain to the constant vigilance required by the downtown ruins. Before moving on, the wanderer looked back up toward the building's summit, now knowing what remarkable achievement existed so far above the wasteland floor. From this distance, the garden itself wasn't visible, just the structural outline of the building's upper stories reaching toward the sky. Yet the knowledge of what flourished there changed the perception of the entire structure. No longer merely another ruin, but a deliberate sanctuary where continuity had been maintained across the apocalypse's dividing line. With this awareness carried forward, the wanderer resumed the southward journey, boots finding rhythm on the broken concrete of streets choked with 2 centuries of accumulated debris. In the pack, Nathaniel's notebooks contained knowledge that might help expand humanity's tenuous foothold in this harsh new world, creating connections between isolated points of persistence that represented the best hope for genuine rebuilding rather than mere survival. In time, the route led toward the banks of the Potomac River, where irradiated waters flowed past the broken monuments of the old world's capital. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fractured landscape as the wanderer continued south, each step carrying forward the knowledge and connections that formed humanity's fragile web of persistence amid the wasteland's harsh realities. While the wanderer journeyed with precious botanical knowledge and seeds of hope, elsewhere along the Potomac's winding shore stood a solitary lighthouse, its ancient beacon still miraculously flickering to life each night. Within its weathered tower, a lone keeper maintained the light against impossible odds, guiding lost travelers safely past treacherous rocks and murky depths. As fog rolled in from the radioactive waters, and the keeper's dwindling power supply threatened to extinguish the vital beacon, our next tale awaits atop those wind-battered stairs. Join us for the Lighthouse Keeper. Evening descended over the capital wasteland in gentle increments, the setting sun casting long shadows across the broken landscape as its golden light softened the harsh edges of a world transformed by nuclear devastation. The wanderer moved with practiced caution along what remained of the coastal road, boots finding secure footing on crumbling asphalt that nature had been reclaiming for 2 centuries. To the east, the Potomac River flowed in its widened course toward the sea, its waters reflecting the amber glow of dusk while concealing the radiation that still permeated its depths. The journey from Rivet City had taken most of the day, a detour necessitated by reports of super-mutant activity along the more direct route had added hours to the travel time. Dr. Lee's response to Nathaniel's botanical research had been worth the effort, however. The notebooks in the Wanderer's pack now contained additional pages of notes, questions, and proposed collaborative experiments, the beginning of a knowledge exchange that might benefit settlements throughout the capital wasteland. The Pip-Boy on the Wanderer's wrist clicked with increasing frequency as the path drew closer to the shoreline. its radiation detector registering the higher contamination levels typical of areas near major waterways. According to its map function, suitable shelter should be available within the next few miles. The coastal regions had once been dotted with navigational infrastructure, some of which might have survived the centuries in usable condition. As twilight deepened toward true darkness, a distinctive silhouette appeared on the horizon. A tall, narrow structure rising from a rocky promontory that jutted into the widened river. Even at this distance, its profile was unmistakable to anyone familiar with pre-war nautical installations. A lighthouse, its classical design a stark contrast to the ruined modern structures that predominated elsewhere in the wasteland. More surprising than its survival was what appeared at its summit as darkness settled more firmly across the land. A light, faint but distinct, sweeping in a regular pattern across the water's surface. Not the inconstant illumination of campfires that might indicate raider occupation, but a deliberate, methodical beacon that suggested functioning pre-war technology and the presence of someone maintaining it. The wanderer paused, studying this unexpected discovery with a mixture of caution and interest. Functional, pre-war technology typically attracted attention from various factions. The Brotherhood of Steel, with their mission of preserving technical knowledge. The Enclave, with their quest to reclaim America's technological legacy. Even well-organized raider groups seeking advantage. Yet the lighthouse showed no obvious signs of fortification or occupation by any recognized faction. Just the solitary beam rotating steadily above the darkening wasteland. Decision made to investigate, the wanderer approached with appropriate caution, following a path that wound upward through scrubby vegetation toward the lighthouse's base. Closer inspection revealed a structure that had weathered the nuclear apocalypse with remarkable resilience, its stone construction having withstood both the initial blasts and 2 centuries of subsequent exposure. The lighthouse stood perhaps 100 feet tall, its white paint long faded to a weathered grey, but its circular form largely intact. At its base sprawled a small keeper's house, its windows glowing with the soft illumination of what might be oil lamps or candles. As the wanderer reached the small cleared area surrounding the buildings, the door to the keeper's house opened, spilling warmer light onto the ground outside. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a man of medium height, his posture straight despite what appeared to be advanced age. He carried a shotgun held casually but competently at his side. "That's far enough for now," he called, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age but clear and steady. "State your business, traveler." The wanderer stopped as requested, hands held slightly away from weapons in the universal wasteland gesture of non-aggressive intent. "Just passing along the coast road, saw your light. Didn't expect to find functioning pre-war tech out here." The man in the doorway remained still for a long moment, studying his visitor with the careful assessment typical of those who had survived long in the wasteland. Whatever he saw apparently offered some reassurance, as he lowered the shotgun slightly, though he maintained his position in the doorway. "Not many come this way deliberately," he said finally. "Road doesn't lead anywhere worth the radiation risk for most. You're welcome to approach, but keep your hands where I can see them." The wanderer complied, moving closer with measured steps. The keeper's features became visible as the distance closed. A man, perhaps in his 60s, with the deeply weathered skin of someone who had spent decades exposed to the elements. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and his clothes, while clearly assembled from wasteland scavenging, showed careful maintenance rather than the haphazard appearance common to raiders or other transient groups. "I'm Ellis," he said, as the wanderer reached conversational distance. "Been tending this light for going on 23 years now." He gestured toward the tower with a hint of pride. one of the few still functioning on the eastern seaboard, far as I know. Call me the Wanderer, came the simple reply. Impressive to keep pre-war technology running that long, not an easy feat in the Wasteland. Something in this recognition of his achievement seemed to register positively with Ellis, his posture relaxing slightly, though his eyes maintained their careful evaluation. It serves a purpose, more than can be said for most relics from before the war. He glanced upward toward the rotating beam. That light guides traders and travelers along this stretch of coast, helps them avoid the worst radiation pockets and submerged hazards. Saved more lives than I can count over the years. He returned his attention to his visitor, decision visibly forming in his expression. Night's coming on proper now, no good traveling these shores in darkness. Too many meerlurks emerge from the waters after sunset. You're welcome to shelter here till morning, if you're willing to respect my home and help with a small matter that needs attention. The offer represented typical wasteland pragmatism, shelter exchanged for assistance, mutual benefit underlying the temporary alliance. The Wanderer nodded acceptance. Appreciate the offer, happy to help with whatever needs doing. Ellis stepped back from the doorway, gesturing for the Wanderer to enter. Come in then, we can discuss it where the Mirrorlurks can't overhear our business. The Keeper's house interior revealed the careful accumulation of both practical necessities and small comforts that defined successful wasteland living. Most telling were the small details that transformed mere shelter into a home. Handcrafted furniture arranged around a central hearth, walls adorned with navigational charts and hand-drawn maps of the coastal regions, shelves holding a modest collection of books predominantly focused on nautical and technical subjects. Ellis secured the door behind them with a series of locks that suggested long experience with the wasteland's various threats. He placed the shotgun in a wall-mounted rack within easy reach but no longer carried it, a sign of cautious trust extended to his visitor. Have a seat, he offered, gesturing toward a sturdy chair near the hearth, where a small fire provided both warmth and cooking capability. Must have been traveling since daybreak to reach here from any safe settlement. Hungry? The Wanderer accepted the chair with appreciation for both its comfort and the symbolic acceptance it represented. Wouldn't turn down a meal? I have rations to contribute. Ellis nodded approval at this offer, moving toward a small cooking area with the efficiency of long-established routine. Mirrorlurk stew's nearly ready, been simmering most of the day. Your rations can supplement our breakfast instead. The stew that eventually filled two mismatched but clean bowls proved remarkably flavorful, the sometimes overly fishy taste of Mirrorlurk meat balanced by herbs that must have been cultivated in the small garden visible outside one of the house's windows. Ellis provided Brahmin milk to accompany the meal, a luxury that hinted at trading connections with inland settlements where the two-headed cattle could be raised safely. As they ate, Ellis outlined the situation that required assistance. The lighthouse mechanism runs on a modified fusion cell system. Original pre-war design used grid power with generator backup, but I've adapted it to function independently since there hasn't been a power grid for 200 years. He spoke with the matter-of-fact competence of someone thoroughly versed in their technical domain. Current cell is failing faster than expected. Got maybe 3 days of operation left at most. I have a replacement, but it's in a storage bunker about a mile down the coast. He paused, expression growing more serious. Problem is, I twisted my knee badly last week helping a caravan that was under attack by Mirrorlurks. Can't make the trip myself right now. Without that replacement cell, the light goes dark. Ships get lost. People die. The situation was clear. A straightforward mission to retrieve a critical component, complicated by the coastal region's specific hazards. What's between here and there? The Wanderer asked, the practical question of someone accustomed to wasteland problem solving. Typical shore hazards. Radiation hotspots I can mark on your map. Several mirror-lurk nesting areas. They're more aggressive after dark, so morning would be the safest time. One section where the old roads collapsed entirely, requiring a detour through shallow water. Ellis pulled a weathered chart from a nearby shelf, spreading it on the table between them. Storage facility is here. Pre-war Coast Guard auxiliary station. Small underground bunker, well hidden. That's why I use it for secure storage rather than keeping everything here at the lighthouse. He indicated the route with a finger worn smooth by years of practical labor. I'd normally make the round trip in about 3 hours, accounting for caution in certain areas. Given the detours and extra care needed, you might need 4 or 5. The Wanderer studied the chart with focused attention, mentally noting landmarks and potential danger zones. Security on the bunker. Key and combination lock. I'll provide both. No automated systems. Those failed decades ago. Ellis reached into a pocket and produced a heavy key attached to a small metal vial. Combinations inside the vial. Precaution in case the key's lost or taken. Finder couldn't access the bunker without both. These preparations spoke to the lighthouse keeper's thoroughness and foresight, qualities that had likely contributed to his long survival in a region many considered too dangerous for permanent habitation. The Wanderer accepted the key and vial with appropriate care, securing them in an inner pocket designed for valuable items. The replacement cell will be in a lead-lined case on the middle shelf, right side as you enter, Ellis continued. Identical to the one currently powering the light, about the size of your hand. Handle with care. It's stable, but best not to drop or impact it unnecessarily. With the immediate mission parameters established, conversation shifted to broader topics as they finished their meal. Ellis proved to be a thoughtful observer of wasteland dynamics, his isolated position providing unique perspective on the capital wasteland's evolution. From his lighthouse vantage point, he'd witnessed the rise and fall of various factions, the gradual shifts in migratory patterns of both humans and mutated wildlife, even subtle changes in the region's weather patterns over his decades of consistent observation. Brotherhood's been more active along this coast recently, he noted, refilling their cups with a surprisingly decent tea brewed from cultivated mutated flora. Not just patrols. They've been taking depth soundings and water samples, looking for something specific, I'd wager, though they're tight-lipped about their purposes, as always. Project Purity has them focused on water purification, the Wanderer offered. They might be mapping radiation concentrations for potential future treatment areas. Ellis considered this with a thoughtful nod. Makes sense. Their goals have shifted under Elder Lions, less obsessed with hoarding technology, more concerned with regional stability. It's a welcome change, even if their methods remain more militant than many would prefer. This exchange of observations continued as evening deepened, representing the valuable information commerce that flowed between wasteland travelers and those who maintained fixed positions, each possessing knowledge the other lacked, their combination creating a more complete understanding of a world too vast and dangerous for any individual to fully comprehend alone. Eventually, Ellis rose from his chair, gathering their empty dishes with practiced efficiency. Need to check the light before turning in. Care to see the mechanism? Not many get to observe functional pre-war technology of this sophistication up close. The invitation clearly represented a privilege rarely extended, and the Wanderer accepted with appropriate appreciation. Ellis led the way outside, where full darkness had now enveloped the landscape, making the lighthouse beam all the more dramatic as it cut through the night in steady rotations. A sturdy door at the tower's base opened to reveal a spiral staircase, winding upward through the structure's interior. illuminated by small emergency lights mounted at regular intervals along the wall. 217 steps to the top, Ellis said as they began their ascent. I make this climb at least twice daily. Keeps these old legs stronger than they have any right to be at my age. The climb proceeded at a measured pace, Ellis clearly familiar with each step despite the limited lighting. Occasionally, narrow windows provided glimpses of the darkened wasteland outside, the beam from above momentarily illuminating sections of coastline before continuing its rotation. The wanderer noted the tower's remarkable structural integrity. Minor cracks visible in some sections, but no significant damage that might compromise its stability, a testament to its original construction quality and Ellis's ongoing maintenance. Upon reaching the top, they emerged into a circular room dominated by the massive lens assembly at its center, a complex arrangement of precisely shaped glass and mirrors that focused the light source into the powerful beam visible for miles across the darkened wasteland. Around this central feature, various control systems and monitoring equipment filled much of the available space, their designs clearly pre-war but modified, with the pragmatic adaptations characteristic of wasteland engineering. Fresnel lens, Lizzie explained, gesturing toward the glass assembly with evident pride. 19th century technology that remained essentially unchanged until the war. Perfect example of design that prioritized function and durability over planned obsolescence. That's why it survived when so much else failed. He moved to a control panel, where gauges and indicators displayed the lighthouse's operational status. One dial in particular drew his attention, a power level indicator showing a reading just above the quarter mark, its needle occasionally flickering downward before stabilizing again. Fusion cells deteriorating faster than the usual pattern, he noted with professional concern. Manufacturing inconsistencies were common in those final months before the bombs, as quality control suffered and production was rushed. All the more reason to retrieve the replacement promptly. Ellis proceeded to demonstrate the system's operation, explaining how the original electrical motors had been modified to function with reduced power requirements, how the timing mechanisms regulated the beam's rotation speed, how various fail-safes had been implemented to prevent catastrophic failures. Throughout, his explanation revealed both deep technical knowledge and genuine passion for the lighthouse's function and significance. Most pre-war technology was about convenience, entertainment, or destruction, he observed as they completed the tour of the mechanism. This lighthouse represents something different. Technology dedicated solely to preventing harm, to guiding travelers safely through dangerous waters. That purpose seems worth preserving, especially in a world that's seen so much loss already. This sentiment, preservation of protective rather than destructive capabilities, offered insight into the motivation that had sustained Ellis through his decades of solitary service. Not merely technical appreciation or habitual routine, but commitment to a purpose that transcended personal comfort or advancement. They descended the tower in companionable silence, each step returning them closer to the relative warmth of the keeper's house below. Outside, the night had settled into the quiet rhythm characteristic of coastal regions, the gentle lapping of water against the shore, the occasional call of mutated wildlife, the soft mechanical hum of the lighthouse mechanism continuing its essential work above. Inside the keeper's house once more, Ellis provided bedding for his visitor, a reasonably comfortable pallet positioned near the hearth where residual warmth would make the night more pleasant. Best to start at first light, he advised as they prepared for rest. Gives you maximum daylight for the round trip, and Morellocks are less active during morning hours. The Wanderer arranged equipment for easy access if needed during the night, a precaution born of wasteland experience rather than specific distrust of the current shelter. Ellis seemed to understand this behavior without explanation, nodding approval at the pragmatic preparation as he secured his own sleeping area on the opposite side of the main room. "I'll wake before dawn to check the light," he said as he extinguished all but one small lamp. "Rest well. Morning comes quickly on the coast." Sleep came with surprising ease, the combination of physical fatigue from the day's journey and the relative security of proper shelter creating conditions conducive to proper rest. The lighthouse beam's regular sweeps across the darkened landscape outside created a subtle rhythm visible even through closed eyelids, a mechanical heartbeat that had maintained its steady pulse through decades of wasteland chaos. Morning arrived with the distinctive quality of light unique to coastal regions, a gradual brightening tinged with the moisture of water-laden air, creating a softness rarely experienced in the wasteland's typically harsh illumination. The wanderer woke to find Ellis already active, moving about the house with the quiet efficiency of long-established routine. "Light still functioning properly," he reported as he noticed his guest's wakefulness. "Power levels dropped another few percent overnight, but it should maintain operation until you return with the replacement cell." Breakfast proved simple but nourishing. Cornbread made from ground razor grain, preserved mutfruit harvested from small trees visible in the protected side of the keeper's garden, tea brewed to surprising potency considering the limited resources available. The wanderer contributed jerky from personal supplies, its protein complementing the meal's other components. As they ate, Ellis provided additional details about the coastal route, emphasizing specific landmarks that would guide navigation and areas requiring particular caution. He marked several points on the wanderer's Pip-Boy map: radiation hotspots to avoid, the detour necessitated by the collapsed roadway, the exact location of the hidden bunker entrance. "Most who travel this shore hug the higher ground when possible," he advised. "Tempting to stay near the water for navigation purposes, but the radiation's worse there, and that's where moray lurks establish their nesting territories. Middle path is usually safest, high enough to avoid most aquatic threats, low enough to stay out of potential sniper sightlines from the hills above." With the meal concluded and final preparations complete, the wanderers secured equipment for the journey. Weapons checked and readily accessible, radiation protection measures confirmed, the key and combination vial for the storage bunker secured in their protected pocket. Ellis provided a small lead-lined container for transporting the replacement fusion cell, its design ensuring both physical protection and radiation containment. "Good luck," the lighthouse keeper said as the wanderer prepared to depart. "I'll keep watch from the tower, though there are sections of the route not visible from here. If you're not back by dusk, I'll assume complications have arisen and make alternate arrangements for the light's maintenance." This contingency planning, matter of fact rather than pessimistic, reflected the wasteland reality where even straightforward missions could encounter unexpected challenges. The wanderer acknowledged the practical approach with a nod of understanding before setting out along the coastal path, following the route they had discussed over breakfast. The journey began with an easy section, the path relatively intact as it wound around the rocky promontory that supported the lighthouse, offering occasional views of the Potomac's widened expanse reflecting the morning sunlight. The Pip-Boy clicked steadily, registering background radiation levels elevated above inland averages, but well within safe parameters for limited exposure. After approximately half a mile, the first detour point appeared, a section where erosion had completely undermined the original roadbed, creating a 20-foot gap that dropped directly to the water below. As Ellis had described, a narrow path wound down to a rocky beach area, requiring careful navigation across slippery stones partially submerged at high tide. The Wanderer proceeded with appropriate caution, boots finding secure footing on the irregular surface while maintaining awareness of both potential Mirelurk emergence points and the increasing radiation levels nearer the water's edge. Beyond this obstacle, the path returned to higher ground, following what had once been a scenic coastal route in the world before the bombs. Occasionally, the remains of pre-war infrastructure became visible, rusted guardrails emerging from eroded soil, the crumbling foundations of long, sturdy retaining walls. Nature had reclaimed much of what human industry had constructed, the coastline gradually returning to something resembling its natural state, despite the radiation that still permeated the ecosystem. The predicted Mirelurk territory appeared approximately a mile into the journey, distinctive mounding patterns in the shoreline mud indicating nest construction, partially consumed fish carcasses suggesting recent feeding activity. The Wanderer maintained maximum distance from these warning signs, following the highest viable path while moving with the quiet deliberation that minimized potential attention from the territorial creatures. Despite these precautions, movement registered at the water's edge, a large Mirelurk emerging from partial submersion to investigate the human presence invading its domain. The creature's chitinous shell glistened with moisture as it oriented toward the path, claws raised in potential threat display while its radiation-mutated form assessed whether the intruder represented prey, rival, or irrelevant passing entity. The Wanderer froze in momentary stillness, allowing the Mirelurk's limited visual processing to potentially categorize this motionless figure as non-threatening. When the creature began advancing up the slope despite this precaution, the decision tree shifted to conflict minimization rather than complete avoidance. The 10mm pistol cleared its holster with practiced efficiency, the Wanderer's aim finding the Mirelurk's vulnerable face area exposed between protective shell segments. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, each finding its intended target with precision born of wasteland necessity. The Mirelurk shuddered under the impacts, its advance halting as its neurological systems processed the unexpected damage. Rather than continuing its charge, the creature retreated in awkward sideways movement back toward the water's safety, apparently deciding this potential meal carried higher risk than warranted. The Wanderer waited until the Mirelurk had fully submerged before continuing, maintaining heightened awareness through the remainder of the nesting territory. No further emergencies occurred. Either the injured creature had communicated potential danger to its fellows through whatever methods such beings employed, or the others remained focused on their normal morning activities deeper in the water. Beyond the nesting grounds, the path climbed slightly as the coastline's topography shifted towards steeper terrain. According to Ellis's directions, the storage bunker should be located approximately a quarter-mile ahead, positioned where a small ravine intersected the coastal route. The Pip-Boy's map confirmed this location, a marker pulsing steadily as the distance closed. The bunker entrance proved remarkably well concealed, positioned beneath a natural rock overhang and further camouflaged by strategic placement of native vegetation. Without specific knowledge of its existence, a casual observer would likely pass within feet without noticing the weathered metal door set into the hillside. This discretion explained its survival, unlooted across decades of wasteland scavenging, its contents protected by obscurity as much as by physical security. The key Ellis had provided fit smoothly into a recessed lock positioned at waist height on the door's surface. The Wanderer extracted the small vial attached to the keyring, opening it to reveal a slip of paper bearing a 5-digit combination. This sequence, entered into the mechanical tumbler lock positioned above the key mechanism, yielded a satisfying click as internal components aligned to permit access. With security measures disengaged, the door opened on surprisingly well-maintained hinges, evidence of Ellis's regular maintenance extending to this remote location. Beyond lay a small chamber approximately 15 feet square, its interior illuminated dimly by emergency lighting that appeared to function on an independent power system. Metal shelving lined the walls, supporting numerous containers of various sizes, all arranged with the meticulous organization characteristic of the lighthouse keeper's methodical nature. Following Ellis's directions, the Wanderer located the specified shelf and identified the lead-lined case containing the replacement fusion cell. The container, approximately the size of a pre-war first aid kit, was secured with simple latches rather than locks. Reasonable given the multiple security layers protecting the bunker itself. Opening it revealed the fusion cell nestled in protective foam, its design matching Ellis's description exactly. A cylindrical object approximately hand-sized, with connection ports at one end and status indicators along its side, currently showing dormant readings. The Wanderer transferred the fusion cell to the transport container provided by Ellis, securing it carefully before returning the original case to its position on the shelf. A quick survey of the bunker's other contents revealed an impressive cache of supplies and spare parts, enough to maintain the lighthouse's operation for years, perhaps decades, with proper management. Technical manuals, tools, preserved food stores, medical supplies, even ammunition for standard wasteland weapons. A prudent reserve against future need, established with the forethought of someone committed to long-term sustainability rather than merely immediate survival. With the primary objective secured, the Wanderer resealed the bunker, ensuring both locks engaged properly to maintain the location's security. The return journey began with the same careful navigation of the coastal path, though familiarity with the route now allowed slightly increased pace while maintaining appropriate caution at known hazard points. The Mirrorlurk territory proved quieter during the return passage, whether due to the creature's normal activity cycle transitioning toward midday quiescence or wariness following the earlier encounter. No movement was visible along the shoreline. The Wanderer traversed this section with undiminished vigilance nonetheless, Wasteland experience having taught the unpredictability of mutated wildlife behavior. The detour around the collapsed roadway presented slightly more challenge during the return journey, the tide having risen further, reducing the available dry passage and increasing radiation exposure as the path necessarily drew closer to the water. The Pip-Boy clicked with increased frequency, though readings remained below levels requiring medical intervention. The Wanderer navigated this section with efficiency born of necessity, minimizing time spent in the higher radiation zone while maintaining sure footing on the slippery rock surfaces. By early afternoon, the lighthouse returned to view, its white form standing stark against the coastline's more muted colors. From this distance, the beam was invisible in daylight, but the knowledge of its continued operation provided satisfaction nonetheless. The mission nearly complete, the critical components secured, the lighthouse's function preserved for continued service to coastal travelers. As the Wanderer approached the final stretch of path leading to the lighthouse grounds, movement became visible near the keeper's house. Ellis, emerging to watch the return, his posture suggesting relief at the mission's apparent success. He raised a hand in greeting as the distance closed, advancing to meet his returning visitor with evident anticipation. "You made good time," he observed as they reached conversational distance, his gaze immediately focusing on the lead-lined container carried with careful attention. "Any complications along the route?" "Single Mirrorlurk near the nesting grounds," the Wanderer reported. "Discouraged rather than eliminated. Otherwise uneventful." Ellis nodded, accepting this efficient summary with the appreciation of someone who valued practical reporting over elaboration. "Good. Best not to kill mirror lurks unless absolutely necessary. They serve their purpose in the ecosystem, controlling mutated fish populations that would otherwise overrun the river. Balance matters, even in a broken world. This ecological perspective offered another glimpse of the thoughtful philosophy underlying Ellis's caretaking approach, not merely maintaining a specific piece of technology, but considering its context within broader natural systems. Such holistic thinking had become rare in a wasteland where immediate survival concerns typically overwhelmed longer-term environmental considerations. They proceeded to the lighthouse tower, where Ellis led the way up the spiral staircase with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made the climb thousands of times. The afternoon light filtered through the tower's narrow windows, creating bands of illumination across the steps that shifted with their ascent. At the top, the lens mechanism continued its steady rotation, though now the control panel's power indicator showed readings hovering just above the critical threshold. Just in time, Ellis noted, studying the gauges with professional assessment. Another day at most before complete failure. Let's get the replacement installed while we still have sufficient reserve power for the transition. The procedure for exchanging the fusion cells proved methodical but straightforward, Ellis directing each step with clear instructions while the Wanderer provided assistance where greater physical strength or flexibility was required. The failing cell was carefully disconnected, its housing cleaned of accumulation before the replacement was positioned and secured. Throughout, Ellis maintained a running commentary, explaining the system's design and function, his detailed knowledge suggesting decades spent studying the lighthouse's original technical documentation. With the new cell installed and connections verified, Ellis activated the transition sequence, a series of calibration procedures that would shift power draw from the old cell to the new without interrupting the beacon's operation. Indicators on the control panel responded with encouraging readings, power levels rising steadily as the fresh cell came fully online. Perfect, Ellis pronounced with evident satisfaction as the final checks completed successfully. That cell should provide approximately 5 years of continuous operation, assuming standard degradation patterns. Lighthouse remains operational, maintaining its service to those navigating these waters. He secured the depleted cell in the lead-lined container, explaining that even exhausted fusion cells retained value, their remaining material useful for smaller applications or potentially rechargeable using specialized equipment maintained by certain technical factions. Nothing wasted, everything serving its maximum purpose. Another expression of the sustainable approach that characterized the lighthouse keeper's operation. As they descended the tower once more, Ellis's demeanor subtly shifted, a relaxation visible now that the lighthouse's continued function had been ensured. "You've done me a significant service," he acknowledged, as they reached the ground level. "Saved weeks of potential downtime while my knee healed enough for the journey. Travelers along this coast remain protected because of your assistance." Back in the keeper's house, Ellis insisted on providing a proper meal. In appreciation, Meyerlurk cakes prepared with practiced skill, vegetables from his modest garden, even a small portion of preserved fruit that must have been traded at considerable expense from inland agricultural settlements. As they ate, he shared more of the lighthouse's history and his own journey to becoming its caretaker. "Wasn't always alone here," he explained, his gaze momentarily distant with memory. "My wife and I discovered this place together about 25 years back. Marina had been a Brotherhood scribe before disagreements about their mission prompted her departure, had the technical knowledge to recognize the lighthouse's potential, the vision to see what it could mean for coastal travelers if restored to function." He gestured toward bookshelves containing technical manuals and hand-drawn diagrams. "She's the one who figured out how to adapt modern fusion cells to power the original mechanisms, spent 3 years modifying components, testing configurations, developing maintenance protocols. Light first came back on during a radstorm. Still remember watching that beam cut through the radiation haze, feeling like we'd reclaimed something valuable from the world before. The personal history carried a weight of both pride and loss. Ellis's expression suggesting Marina's absence was relatively recent rather than distant past. The Wanderer received this sharing with appropriate respect, recognizing the privilege of being granted access to memories clearly precious to the lighthouse keeper. She passed 4 winters ago, Ellis continued after a contemplative moment. Radiation exposure accumulated over decades of wasteland travel finally caught up with her, but she lived to see the lighthouse become known to traders and travelers throughout the region, recognized as a navigation point that saved countless lives. That mattered to her, creating something that protected rather than destroyed, that guided rather than misled. This legacy clearly provided purpose that sustained Ellis through solitude that might have broken those with less conviction. The lighthouse represented not merely a technical achievement, but a connection to his partner's memory, a continuation of shared values that transcended individual survival. As evening approached once more, the Wanderer prepared for departure, the mission complete, the road ahead calling with its persistent rhythm. Ellis provided additional supplies for the journey, despite his visitor's assurance that current provisions remained adequate. Considerate payment for services rendered, the lighthouse keeper insisted. The Wasteland functions on exchange caps, goods, assistance, information, balance maintained through fair dealings rather than exploitation. You've helped ensure the light continues. These supplies help ensure you continue. The philosophical perspective underlying this practical exchange offered another glimpse of the thoughtful approach that characterized Ellis's interaction with the broken world around him. Finding meaning and ethical framework within the wasteland's harsh realities, rather than surrendering to mere pragmatism without principle. With preparations complete and farewell exchanged, the Wanderer departed as the day's last light painted the coastal landscape in subtle amber hues. Behind, the lighthouse stood silhouetted against the darkening eastern sky, its beam already visible as it began its nightly rotation. The structure represented something increasingly rare in the capital wasteland, not merely survival or temporary advantage, but sustained purpose, dedicated to others' welfare across decades of consistent service. As the Wanderer continued along the coastal road, boots finding rhythm on the broken asphalt, the lighthouse beam swept regularly across the gathering darkness behind, a steady pulse of human intention persisting against the entropy that had claimed so much of the world. Ellis remained at his post, maintaining the flame that guided travelers safely through dangerous waters, his solitary vigil an act of quiet heroism unrecognized by most who benefited from its light. The wasteland stretched ahead, vast and dangerous, yet also containing such unexpected points of preservation and purpose for those willing to look beyond immediate appearance. Somewhere inland, settlements continued their gradual rebuilding efforts. Travelers moved between isolated outposts of civilization. Others, like Ellis, maintained their own specialized functions that contributed to humanity's tenuous foothold in this harsh new world. As darkness settled more completely across the landscape, the Wanderer continued southward, carrying forward not just supplies and equipment, but the knowledge of connections maintained between past and present, between isolated individuals dedicated to purposes larger than themselves, between fragments of a world struggling to reassemble some new coherence from the broken pieces of the old. While the lighthouse beam continued its steady sweep behind, guiding travelers safely through the night, elsewhere in the capital wasteland stood a different sort of beacon, a crumbling metro station, where a single occupant maintained eternal vigil. Within its decaying walls, an elderly woman sat patiently on a weathered bench, waiting for trains long silenced and family never to return, keeping alive memories of the world before through stories shared with rare visitors who stumbled upon her solitary platform. As announcements still echoed through non-functioning speakers and empty tracks gathered dust, our next tale awaits within those underground chambers of remembrance. Join us for the train that never came. The midday sun filtered through breaks in the cloud cover, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the capital wasteland. Dust particles danced in these golden beams, swirling on gentle currents of air that carried the metallic scent characteristic of lands still healing from nuclear devastation. The ruins of what had once been a thriving suburban community stretched before the wanderer. Collapsed houses, rusted vehicles, and cracked streets, gradually being reclaimed by hardy wasteland flora that pushed through any available opening in humanity's crumbling creations. The wanderer moved with practiced caution through this broken landscape, each step placed deliberately to minimize noise while maximizing awareness of surroundings. The leather armor bore the weathered patina of countless miles, reinforced with mismatched metal plates that told stories of encounters survived and lessons learned. A scarf wound loosely around the lower face provided protection from the ever-present dust, while a wide-brimmed hat shaded eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. The Pip-Boy on the Wanderer's wrist occasionally clicked as its radiation detector registered the background levels that permeated everything in the capital wasteland. Nothing dangerous in this area, merely the ambient reminder of what had transpired 2 centuries earlier. Its screen displayed a map with a marked route, guiding toward a destination still several hours distant at current pace. According to both the device's data and information gathered from traders encountered at the last settlement, the day's journey would require passing through what had once been a transportation hub. A pre-war metro station that had connected these suburbs to the urban center miles away. Such locations typically offered potential shortcuts through otherwise impassable urban ruins, though they carried their own risks: structural instability, feral ghouls that had made darkness their home, occasionally more dangerous entities that valued the strategic advantages of controlling underground passages. The terrain began to slope downward as the wanderer approached what maps identified as Falls Church Station, one of the metro system's outer terminals that had once served commuters from the surrounding residential areas. Unlike many such facilities encountered throughout the wasteland, this station's entrance remained remarkably intact, concrete supports showing minimal damage, the station's name still legible on signage above escalators that had ceased functioning when the bombs fell. The wanderer paused at the entrance, listening intently for sounds that might indicate danger within. The typical signs of feral ghoul habitation were noticeably absent. No shuffling movements echoing from below, no distinctive vocalizations that suggested their presence. Instead, a different sound carried faintly from the depths. A voice, too regular in its cadence to be human speech, more like a recording playing on constant loop. Decision made to investigate with appropriate caution, the wanderer descended the non-functioning escalator, steps silent on the metal treads worn smooth by centuries of exposure to the elements. The station's main concourse opened below, a large chamber that had once housed ticket counters, information displays, and retail spaces catering to daily commuters. Now it stood in arrested decay, preserved more completely than many such spaces due to its partially subterranean positioning having protected it from the worst effects of weather and scavenger activity. Most striking was the illumination, not the harsh fluorescent glare that would have filled this space in its operational days, but a softer glow emanating from emergency lighting that somehow continued functioning after 2 centuries. These lights, designed to operate on independent power reserves during grid failures, cast a gentle amber illumination that created pools of visibility amid the subterranean shadows. The recorded voice became clearer as the Wanderer advanced further into the station, an artificial corporate tone emanating from hidden speakers, delivering a message stuck in eternal repetition. Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, all Green Line trains are experiencing delays. We apologize for any inconvenience. Please remain in designated waiting areas. Normal service will resume shortly. Thank you for your patience. The announcement repeated at regular intervals, its calm assurance of resumed service carrying an unintended poignancy 200 years after the nuclear devastation had ensured no train would ever arrive again. Some auxiliary power system must have remained functional, maintaining this small pocket of the old world in perpetual anticipation of a normalcy that would never return. Following the sound led deeper into the station, past turnstiles frozen in their final positions, through a corridor whose walls still displayed faded advertisements for products long since rendered irrelevant. The passage opened onto the main platform area, a long space with tracks visible below, designed to accommodate the arrival and departure of metro trains that had once carried thousands of passengers daily between suburbs and city centre. Here, the emergency lighting created an almost theatrical effect, illuminating the platform while leaving the tracks below in deeper shadow. Benches positioned at regular intervals along the platform's length remained largely intact, their design having emphasized durability over comfort. Most surprising was what occupied one of these benches, not the expected debris or signs of temporary habitation by wasteland travelers, but a solitary human figure. The Wanderer paused in momentary stillness, assessing this unexpected presence. The figure appeared to be an elderly woman, sitting with remarkable poise on a bench positioned directly beneath one of the emergency lights. Her white hair was arranged in a neat bun, and she wore clothes that, while clearly assembled from wasteland scavenging, showed unusual care in their selection and maintenance. She held a small book open in her lap, though she wasn't currently reading it. Her gaze instead directed toward the empty tracks as though expecting an arrival. Moving with deliberate steps that would announce presence without suggesting threat, the Wanderer approached. The woman turned at the sound, revealing a face lined by decades of wasteland existence, yet maintaining a dignity that transcended mere survival. Her expression registered the visitor with calm assessment rather than alarm or suspicion. "Hello, traveler," she said, her voice carrying the slight quaver of advanced age, but clear and coherent. "Welcome to Falls Church Station. I'm afraid you've just missed the 2:15 express. The next train should be along shortly, though they've been announcing delays." She gestured to the empty bench beside her. "You're welcome to wait with me if you'd like." The disconnect between her words and obvious reality suggested potential confusion or delusion, yet her eyes held a clarity that contradicted simple dementia. The Wanderer accepted the offered seat with a nod of thanks, maintaining a non-threatening posture while trying to better understand this unusual encounter. "Have you been waiting long?" the Wanderer asked, phrase carefully chosen to explore the woman's perspective without directly challenging her apparent belief in still denturing transportation. A smile crossed her weathered features, carrying a knowing quality that hinted at deeper awareness than her previous statement might have suggested. "Oh, quite some time now, since October 23, 2077, to be precise." She closed the book in her lap, placing a faded ribbon to mark her page. "That's when the bombs fell, you know. I was 16, waiting for my parents to collect me after school. They worked in the city and were going to meet me here for the ride home. This clarification revealed something more complex than simple confusion, a deliberate choice to maintain a vigil begun in the final moments before the world changed irrevocably. The woman extended a hand in formal greeting. "I'm Eleanor. Most who pass through just call me the waiting woman, though. It's become something of a local legend, I understand." "People call me the Wanderer," came the simple reply, accepting the handshake with appropriate gentleness given Eleanor's apparent age. "A fitting name for these times," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Few have the luxury of remaining in one place as I have." She gestured around the station, her movement encompassing both its deterioration and its remarkable preservation. "This has been my home for most of the past 2 centuries. Not continuously, of course. Had to leave during the worst years when the raiders controlled the surface access and feral ghouls inhabited the lower tunnels. But I always returned when conditions allowed." Her apparent age didn't align with a lifespan stretching back to before the war, even with the occasional mutations that sometimes extended human longevity in the Wasteland. No ordinary human could have survived that duration. The Wanderer studied her more closely, looking for signs that might explain the discrepancy. Eleanor seemed to recognize this assessment and smiled again, this time with gentle amusement. "You're wondering how I could possibly be the same 16-year-old who waited here that day, aren't you? The answer is both simple and rather complicated. I'm a ghoul, though one fortunate enough to have avoided both the extreme physical deterioration and the mental degradation that afflicts many of our kind." Now that she had identified herself, subtle markers became more apparent. The unusual texture of skin that had adapted to radiation exposure, the slight luminescence in her eyes, characteristic of ghoulification, the quality of her voice that carried the rasp common to those who had undergone this particular mutation. Unlike most ghouls encountered throughout the Wasteland, however, Eleanor had maintained both her mental faculties and a remarkably human appearance, her condition manifesting with unusual subtlety. "I was exposed to a very specific radiation pattern," she continued, anticipating the unasked question. "This station was an experimental site for a new shielding technology being developed by a subsidiary of Vault-Tec. The materials in the walls and ceiling created unusual interaction effects when the initial radiation waves hit. Those of us in the station at that moment experienced selective changes." Her expression suggested memories both painful and profound. "There were 27 people here when the sirens began. Only 3 of us survived the transformation. The others, their bodies rejected the changes too violently." The automated announcement interrupted her narrative, its cheerful corporate assurance of trains that would never arrive, creating a discordant counterpoint to her description of apocalyptic moments. Eleanor paused, allowing the recording to complete its cycle before continuing. "I've had that as my companion for 2 centuries, she noted with remarkable equanimity. "At first I found it maddening. Over time it became merely background, like the ticking of a clock. Now I'd miss it if it stopped. One of the last voices from the world before, still performing its duty long after any purpose remains." The Wanderer nodded, understanding. "You've maintained your vigil just as persistently." "Yes." Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the empty tracks below. "Though my reasons have evolved over time. Initially, it was shock and denial. The desperate hope that my parents might still arrive, that the news reports of nuclear detonations were somehow exaggerated or mistaken. Then, as reality became undeniable, it transformed into something between obligation and unable acceptance." She adjusted her position on the bench, the movement suggesting the physical discomfort of someone who had remained in one place for extended duration. Eventually, I began to understand this place served a purpose beyond my personal waiting. It became a waypoint for travelers, a landmark in the chaos. I could offer directions, share information gathered from previous visitors, sometimes provide safe shelter for those in need. Her explanation carried the quiet dignity of someone who had found meaning in circumstances beyond their control, adaptation rather than mere resignation. In recent decades, it's become something else entirely. She reopened the book in her lap, revealing pages filled with handwritten text rather than pre-war printing. I've become a repository of stories, my own, those of travelers who passed through, fragments of the world before preserved through oral tradition when physical records have been lost. People sometimes come specifically to hear these accounts, or to add their own to my collection. The concept was both simple and profound. In a world where formal historical records had been largely destroyed and literacy had decreased with each post-war generation, oral tradition and memory keepers like Eleanor represented one of the few connections to accurate understanding of the past. Her vigil, begun in personal tragedy, had evolved into cultural preservation of remarkable significance. "Would you share a story?" the wanderer asked, genuine interest evident. Eleanor's expression brightened with pleasure at the request. "I'd be delighted. Would you prefer something from the world before, an account of the early days after the bombs, or perhaps something more recent about the capital Wasteland's development? Something from your own experience of the transition, the days when the old world was ending and the new one hadn't yet taken shape." This request seemed to please her particularly, suggesting it aligned with memories she valued, despite their painful associations. A thoughtful choice. Those days exist now only in the memories of ghouls old enough to have witnessed them, and many of my kind have lost coherent recollection of that period. She closed her handwritten book, preferring to speak directly from memory for this account. Her voice took on a different quality as she began, more formal in cadence, suggesting a story she had refined through multiple tellings into an almost poetic rhythm. I remember the quality of light on that final day. It was autumn, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow that transformed even the station's utilitarian architecture into something beautiful. My greatest concern was an algebra test scheduled for the following morning, for which I felt inadequately prepared. I sat on this very bench, though it was new then, of course, and opened my textbook for some last-minute studying while waiting for my parent. The first indication that something was wrong came from the other waiting passengers. Several were listening to portable radios, and their expressions changed simultaneously: confusion, then concern, then increasing alarm. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as more people tuned in to various channels. I didn't have a radio, so I asked an elderly gentleman beside me what was happening. "Military activity," he said. "Unusual patterns along the coast. Probably just another civil defense exercise." But it wasn't, of course. Within minutes, the station attendant received some communication through official channels. He activated the emergency protocol, which locked the platform access gates and initiated the recorded announcements you still hear. People became frightened, demands for information growing more insistent. I remained seated, believing still that it must be a drill or false alarm, the test tomorrow occupying more of my concern than abstract threats mentioned on the radio. Then we felt it. Not heard, but felt. A deep vibration that came through the ground, through the bench, into our bodies. The emergency lights activated as the main power failed. Some people began to pray, others tried to force the exit gates. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening, still clutching my algebra textbook as though it might contain solutions for this unexpected problem. The radiation came next, though we didn't recognize it as such at the time. The experimental shielding in the station's construction created unusual effects, visible patterns in the air like aurora borealis brought underground, a metallic taste that intensified until it became painful, sensations of heat and cold simultaneously moving through our bodies. People began to collapse, their systems overwhelmed by changes too rapid for biological adaptation. I survived those initial hours through what I've come to believe was simple physiological chance. My particular genetic structure allowing adjustments that proved fatal for others. When the worst had passed, only 3 of us remained conscious among the dead. Myself, a transit security officer named Patrick, and a businessman whose name I never learned. We stayed in the station for 9 days, the surface world too dangerous to risk exposure. The security officer had a small radiation detector that would scream in alarm whenever we approached the exits. We subsisted on food from vending machines and water from maintenance taps designed for cleaning crews. The businessman died on the 4th day, internal bleeding that turned his skin mottled purple. Patrick and I buried him as best we could in a maintenance tunnel, using a service cart to transport his body. On the 10th day, the detector's readings fell enough that Patrick deemed it safe for brief surface reconnaissance. He went up alone, promising to return within an hour. He never came back. I waited 3 days more before venturing above ground myself, necessity finally overcoming fear. The world I emerged into bore no resemblance to what I had left behind. The suburban community surrounding the station had been reduced to skeletal frameworks and ash. No intact structures remained within visible range. The radiation had created unusual weather patterns, a constant haze that filtered sunlight to a sickly yellow, spontaneous electrical storms that would appear without warning. I wandered for months, encountering other survivors only rarely. Most reacted to my changing appearance with fear or hostility. The ghoulification process was gradual for me, but visible enough to mark me as something other than fully human in their perception. Eventually, I returned to the station, finding its familiar confines preferable to the chaotic wasteland above. Over subsequent decades, I ventured out when necessary for supplies, or when conditions below became temporarily untenable, but always returned to resume my vigil. The station became my constant, in a world defined by perpetual change and uncertainty. Eleanor paused, her gaze momentarily distant with recollection before returning to the present. That was the beginning. The first days of what would eventually become the capital wasteland as you know it now. Each year brought new adaptations, new dangers, new small groups attempting to establish order within their limited territories. I observed it all from this vantage point, recording what I witnessed, collecting accounts from those passing through. The wanderer listened with appropriate appreciation for both the content and the rarity of such first-hand testimony. Do many still come specifically to hear your stories? Fewer than once did, Eleanor acknowledged. Brotherhood scribes visited regularly for a period, documenting what I could recall of pre-war technology and infrastructure. Occasionally, parents bring children to hear accounts of the world before, though their interest typically centers on what must seem fantastic elements: televisions, automobiles, aviation, the abundance taken for granted. Some traders maintain the tradition of stopping here to exchange current news for historical context. Her expression suggested acceptance rather than resentment of this gradual decline in visitors. The past recedes in relevance as the present demands more urgent attention. It's the natural progression. As if emphasizing her point, the automated announcement played again. Its relevance long expired, its function reduced to mere acoustic backdrop for a station serving passengers who would never arrive. Eleanor seemed to find gentle humor in the timing, a slight smile crossing her features. The system has enough auxiliary power to continue for perhaps another century, she noted. I've often wondered if these recordings might outlast even my extended lifespan, playing to an empty station long after I've joined those who never returned. This philosophical contemplation carried remarkable serenity rather than melancholy, the perspective of someone who had witnessed enough history to recognize patterns beyond individual mortality. The wanderer recognized something rare in this encounter, a direct connection to the transitional period, so often mythologized in wasteland communities with little access to accurate historical understanding. "Would you be willing to share another story?" the wanderer asked. "One from the early formation period of what became the capital, Wasteland." Eleanor's expression brightened with evident pleasure at this request. "I'd be delighted. So few express interest in that specific period. Most want either pre-war nostalgia or information about current settlement configurations." She considered momentarily, selecting from what must be an extensive mental archive of experiences spanning centuries. "Perhaps you'd find value in the account of how the first trading networks emerged from the initial chaos. It relates directly to how current caravan routes and settlement interconnections develop." At the wanderer's nod of interest, she began another narrative, this one less formally structured than her account of the day the bombs fell, suggesting a story shared less frequently. She described the gradual emergence of brave individuals who recognized the survival advantage in connecting isolated groups that had established footholds in different areas, their early roots following pre-war infrastructure where possible, while adapting to new hazards like radiation hotspots and territorial predators. The first truly successful network centered around a man called Carson, she explained. Former military, though he never specified which branch. He had knowledge of logistics operations and recognized that even simple items could acquire immense value when scarce in specific locations. He began with just himself and a two-headed Brahmin carrying water purification tablets between 3 small settlements north of what remained of the Pentagon. Her account traced how this humble beginning expanded through careful relationship building and consistent reliability, eventually growing into a framework that subsequent trading operations built upon. The trading protocols established during this period, neutral zones for exchanges, standardized value measures, crisis response cooperation, had evolved, but remained fundamentally recognizable in the commerce systems still operating throughout the capital Wasteland. As Eleanor spoke, the wanderer noticed subtle changes in the quality of light permeating the station. Afternoon progressing toward evening above ground, affecting even this subterranean space as sunlight shifted angle through the entrance areas. The day's journey still required covering significant distance before nightfall would necessitate seeking secure shelter, yet Eleanor's narratives created a rare opportunity that justified temporary delay. The wanderer contributed information about more recent developments in trading patterns observed during extensive travels, which Eleanor received with genuine interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her comprehensive understanding of regional economics and social structures. This exchange evolved into broader discussion of how the capital Wasteland had developed distinct regional characteristics. The urban center with its specific hazards and resources, agricultural efforts emerging in outlying areas with lower radiation levels, coastal communities adapting to mirror-lurk territories and tidal patterns. Throughout their conversation, the station's automated announcement continued its eternal loop, marking time with its optimistic assurances of trains that would never arrive. Eleanor had integrated this constant repetition into her existence so thoroughly that she rarely seemed to notice it, though occasionally her narrative would pause briefly to accommodate its completion before resuming. Eventually, the wanderer indicated the need to continue the day's journey before daylight diminished further, leading Eleanor to offer parting insights about the route ahead. Her knowledge of surrounding areas proved remarkably current for someone largely stationary, evidence of her careful attention to information shared by previous visitors. The western approach to Annandale has become more hazardous recently, she advised. A super mutant group displaced from downtown by Brotherhood operations has established territory in the commercial ruins along the old highway. The creek passage 2 miles south remains relatively secure, however, and connects with the destination path you described. This specific guidance, clearly informed by multiple consistent reports, represented the practical value Eleanor provided to Wasteland travelers beyond her historical preservation role. A knowledge repository of current conditions maintained through systematic information collection from diverse sources. As the wanderer prepared to depart, Eleanor reached into a small bag positioned beside her bench and withdrew a carefully wrapped package. "For your journey," she offered, "clean water and preserved food. I maintain supplies for travelers in need, provided by those with abundance to share in exchange for information or stories." The gift represented the continuation of Wasteland reciprocity, resources exchanged for intangibles like knowledge, direction, or merely human connection, in an environment where isolation often proved as dangerous as physical threats. The wanderer accepted with appropriate appreciation, providing some medical supplies in return that would be valuable for future travelers Eleanor might assist. "Before you go," Eleanor said, "would you share a story of your own, something from your travels that I might add to my collection, to share with others who pass through this place?" The request honored Wasteland tradition, the exchange of narratives that maintained connections between isolated communities and individuals. The wanderer considered momentarily before relating an account of Nathaniel's rooftop garden and Ellis's lighthouse, focusing on how each represented different approaches to preserving knowledge and purpose from the world before. Eleanor listened with evident engagement, occasionally making notes in her handwritten book to ensure accurate preservation of details she found particularly significant. "Remarkable examples of persistence," she observed when the account concluded, "each maintaining continuity in their own way, just as I do here, though with more practical applications than merely collecting stories." Her tone carried admiration rather than self-deprecation, recognizing the spectrum of contributions possible in rebuilding human connection across the Wasteland's fractured landscape. With farewells exchanged, the wanderer ascended the non-functioning escalator toward daylight, leaving Eleanor seated on her bench beneath the amber emergency lighting, her handwritten book open as she made additional notes about their encounter. The automated announcement played once more before the station's acoustics faded from audible range, its corporate assurance of resumed service continuing its endless loop beneath the ruins, maintaining its own form of vigil alongside the woman who had made patience her defining quality. Emerging into late afternoon sunlight, the wanderer adjusted to the transition from the station's perpetual twilight to natural illumination, checking the Pip-Boy's map function to confirm the creek route Eleanor had recommended. Her detailed knowledge proved accurate, the path visible as it wound through less developed terrain where natural features provided both concealment from potentially hostile observation and markers for navigation. The journey resumed with the steady rhythm of boots on broken ground, each step carrying forward not just physical progress, but the stories exchanged. Eleanor's first-hand accounts of the world's ending and rebirth, the wanderer's observations of those maintaining different forms of continuity across the capital wasteland. Such connections, however brief, formed the underlying structure of human persistence, in a world where isolation represented a more insidious threat than the obvious dangers of radiation or mutated wildlife. As the sun continued its westward arc, casting longer shadows across the fractured landscape, the wanderer followed the creek passage as directed, boots occasionally splashing through shallow water where the path narrowed between rocky embankments. Above, birds adapted to the wasteland ecology circled on thermal currents, their mutations visible in unusual wing configurations and coloration, but their essential nature persisting despite environmental pressures. Another form of continuity spanning the divide between worlds. The wasteland stretched ahead, vast and dangerous, yet populated by individuals maintaining their own forms of memory and purpose. Nathaniel tending his botanical legacy above the ruins, Ellis keeping his lighthouse beacons sweeping across darkened waters, Eleanor preserving stories from across time in her underground vigil, different expressions of the same fundamental quality that had allowed humanity to endure through nuclear devastation and its aftermath, the determination to retain connection with what came before while adapting to what now existed. While the wanderer continued along the creek path with Eleanor's stories echoing in memory, elsewhere in the capital wasteland stood a humble roadside establishment untouched by time's decay. Inside a dusty tavern where the lights still somehow glowed, a ghoul bartender polished glasses that would never again know the touch of pre-war patrons, keeping his jukebox playing a single surviving song that filled the empty space with melodies from a world long vanished. As he challenged rare visitors to friendly games on his pool table and poured drinks from bottles that had survived nuclear fire, our next tale awaits between felt-covered rails and amber-filled glasses. Join us for The Last Song on the Jukebox. Golden light stretched across the capital wasteland as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows that softened the harsh edges of a broken world. The day's heat gradually yielded to evening's cooler embrace, bringing relief to the parched landscape. Dust motes danced in slanting rays that penetrated the sparse cloud cover, creating ephemeral veils that shifted with each gentle breeze. Despite its time of year, the wanderer moved with measured steps along what had once been a secondary highway, now reduced to cracked asphalt, partially reclaimed by stubborn wasteland vegetation. The journey from Eleanor's metro station had taken longer than anticipated. A mirror-lurk breeding ground near the creek passage had necessitated a significant detour, adding miles to the day's travel. According to the Pip-Boy's map function, the next settlement remained several hours distant, making it unlikely to arrive before full darkness settled across the land. Experience had taught the essential wasteland wisdom that traveling after nightfall invited unnecessary risk. Reduced visibility, combined with the nocturnal habits of predatory wildlife and raider groups, created conditions best avoided when possible. Suitable shelter would need to be located soon, preferably someplace defensible, with clear sight lines that would allow rest without sacrificing security. The Pip-Boy emitted a soft click as the Wanderer adjusted its display, cycling through available data to check radiation levels and topographical features that might offer shelter options. As the screen illuminated with its characteristic amber glow, an unexpected marker appeared, a location not far from the current position, labeled simply as Joey's Place, with a note indicating potential resupply opportunities. The entry lacked detailed information about the site's current status or occupants, suggesting it had been logged from second-hand information rather than direct observation. Decision made to investigate this potential waypoint, the Wanderer adjusted course slightly, following the broken highway as it curved around a gentle rise in the terrain. Upon cresting this small elevation, an unexpected sight appeared in the near distance. A standalone building that had weathered the nuclear apocalypse with remarkable resilience. Its structure largely intact despite the surrounding devastation. The establishment's purpose was immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with pre-war architecture. A roadside bar designed to serve travelers along what had once been a busy route between residential areas and recreational destinations. Its construction exemplified mid-21st century nostalgic design, deliberately evoking earlier eras with chrome detailing and distinctive neon signage. Most surprising was that this signage appeared partially functional, its tubes glowing with faint blue and red illumination despite the 2 centuries that had passed since the power grid's collapse. The wanderer approached with appropriate caution, maintaining awareness of potential ambush points while studying the establishment for signs of current occupation. No movement was visible through windows that remained surprisingly intact, though interior illumination suggested some form of power source within. The parking area contained the rusted remains of several vehicles that had clearly remained undisturbed since the day the bombs fell, their decayed forms gradually sinking into soil that had accumulated around their chassis over decades of weather exposure. Most telling was the absence of typical raider modifications. No dismembered mannequins or grisly trophies adorned the exterior. No crude gang symbols had been painted across the walls. No barricades of bone and scrap metal protected the approaches. If someone maintained this location, they operated with subtlety uncharacteristic of the Wasteland's more aggressive inhabitants. Allegra glanced. The bar's entrance consisted of double doors beneath a small awning, one door propped permanently open while the other remained closed. Light spilled from this opening onto the cracked pavement outside, creating a pool of warm illumination that stood in stark contrast to the Wasteland's normal darkness. From within came another unexpected element, music, its melodic tones muffled by distance but unmistakably pre-war in composition and arrangement. The wanderer paused at the perimeter of the illuminated area, listening intently to both the music and any potential sounds of movement or conversation that might indicate the number of occupants. The melody continued uninterrupted, but no voices accompanied it, the establishment either empty save for an automated system or occupied by someone maintaining unusual silence. Decision made to announce presence rather than attempt stealth entry, the wanderer approached the open door with deliberate steps that would be audible to anyone inside, hands positioned for visibility while maintaining access to weapons if needed. The music grew clearer with proximity, a melancholy tune with orchestral accompaniment supporting a male vocalist whose smooth delivery spoke of romantic disappointment. The recording quality suggesting origin in what Wasteland historians called the pre-war golden age of musical production. The doorway revealed an interior that triggered immediate cognitive dissonance. A space seemingly transported intact from before the nuclear devastation, preserved in remarkable detail against all probability. The bar itself stretched along one wall, its polished surface gleaming in warm light provided by fixtures designed to evoke an even earlier era. Behind it stood rows of bottles, many still containing amber and clear liquids, arranged with meticulous precision. Booths with red vinyl upholstery lined the opposite wall, their surfaces showing wear but remaining functional. A pool table occupied the central floor space, its green felt dusty but largely intact. Balls arranged in perfect triangular formation, as though awaiting the break shot of a game not yet begun. Most remarkable was the source of the music. A jukebox positioned in the far corner, its curved glass illuminated from within by lights that cycled through a spectrum of colors, creating patterns that reflected across the room's surfaces. The device was clearly operational, the mechanical components visible through its display panel, moving with practiced precision as they maintained the playback of a record, secured somewhere in its internal workings. "Well now," came a raspy voice from behind the bar, drawing the wanderer's attention to a figure previously unnoticed in the shadows of the bottle display. "Don't get many visitors these days. Been, 4 months since anyone came through that door?" The speaker emerged into better illumination, revealing himself as a ghoul, his skin bearing the characteristic texture of prolonged radiation exposure, his features suggesting the centuries-long existence typical of his kind. Unlike many ghouls encountered throughout the Wasteland, however, he moved with the precise control of someone whose mental faculties remained entirely intact, no evidence of the feral degradation that claimed so many of his kind. He wore what appeared to be the remnants of formal attire, a white shirt with bow tie, vest and slacks, all maintained with remarkable care despite their obvious age. A bartender's apron completed the ensemble, its pockets containing the various small tools of the trade. He held a glass in one hand and a cloth in the other, engaged in the eternal bartender's ritual of polishing that seemed to transcend even nuclear apocalypse. "Welcome to Joey's," he continued, gesturing expansively with the glass. "Last traditional American bar still operating in the capital Wasteland, far as I know. I'm Joseph Franklin, owner and proprietor since 2072, though most just call me Joey these days." He placed the glass on the bar with practiced precision, aligning it with an invisible mark. "What can I get for you, traveler?" The wanderer approached the bar, taking in details that further emphasized the establishment's improbable preservation. Coasters stacked in perfect columns, ashtrays cleaned of decades of potential accumulation, serving implements arranged by function and size in their designated positions. Something beyond mere survival motivation drove this meticulous maintenance, suggesting purpose more profound than practical necessity. "Water would be welcome," the wanderer replied, settling onto a bar stool that creaked slightly under the unaccustomed weight. "Supplies are running lower than ideal." Joey nodded understanding, reaching below the counter to produce a remarkably clean glass and a bottle of purified water that bore none of the usual radiation indicators common to wasteland sources. He poured with the flourish of someone performing an art rather than merely serving a beverage, the simple action elevated by decades of repetition into something approaching ceremony. "On the house," he said, sliding the glass forward. "First drinks always complimentary for new visitors. Establishment policy since we opened, no reason to change it just because the world ended." This last statement carried a wry humor that suggested healthy perspective on his unusual circumstances, adaptation rather than denial characterizing his relationship with the changed reality outside his preserved domain. The water proved surprisingly pure, lacking the metallic aftertaste typical of even filtered wasteland sources, suggesting access to pre-war reserves or exceptional purification technology. The wanderer expressed appropriate appreciation, which Joey acknowledged with the subtle nod of someone accustomed to receiving compliments for professional services rendered. "You've maintained this place remarkably well," the wanderer observed, gesturing toward the immaculate surroundings. "Most pre-war establishments didn't survive the initial blasts, let alone 2 centuries of wasteland conditions." Joey's weathered features formed what might have been his version of a smile. "Combination of fortunate circumstances and stubborn dedication," he explained, retrieving another glass for polishing despite its already pristine condition. "Building was constructed as a prototype for a planned franchise expansion. Reinforced against natural disasters, independent power system designed for remote locations, water purification unit in the basement, meant to demonstrate self-sufficiency in areas with unreliable infrastructure." His raspy laugh carried genuine amusement. Corporate headquarters was touting those features as selling points for potential investors the very week the bombs dropped. Ironic that their marketing gimmicks became survival essentials overnight. This explanation addressed the physical preservation, but not the more intriguing question of Joey's personal dedication to maintaining a business establishment whose original purpose had seemingly expired with the civilization that created it. The Wanderer's expression must have conveyed this unasked question, as Joey continued unprompted. As for why I've kept it all going, he paused, his gaze momentarily distant, seeing perhaps not the wasteland of the present but the world that had been. Started as simple survival, secure location, clean water, preserved food stores, then became habit, routine against the chaos outside, eventually evolved into something more like purpose. He gestured toward the establishment's immaculate condition, maintaining one small corner of civilization amid the general collapse, preserving not just the physical space, but the function it served. A neutral ground where weary travelers could find temporary respite from the wasteland's constant demand. The jukebox finished its song, the final notes fading into momentary silence before mechanical components whirred softly and the same melody began again from its opening notes. Joey glanced toward the machine with an expression combining affection and resignation. Only got the one record still functioning, he explained. Had a full selection originally, 300 titles spanning classical to contemporary. Over the decades, the playback mechanisms damaged most of them beyond repair. This last one keeps playing only because I've rebuilt the tracking assembly more times than I can count. The Wanderer listened to the song with renewed attention, recognizing now that what had initially seemed like an unusual coincidence of timing arriving during this particular musical selection was instead the only option remaining in the jukebox's once vast repertoire. The melody carried additional poignancy with this understanding, its continued existence against overwhelming odds, paralleling Joey's own improbable persistence. Appropriate that it survived when the others didn't, Joey commented, noting the Wanderer's focused attention on the music. I don't want to set the world on fire by the ink spots. Popular just before the war's outbreak. Chorus always struck me as particularly ironic, given what eventually happened. Indeed, as if responding to his observation, the song reached its refrain, the smooth harmonies delivering the titular line with complete sincerity, unaware that future events would transform their romantic hyperbole into darkly literal prophecy. Joey listened with the half attention of someone who had heard the same selection thousands of times. Familiarity having transformed the experience without diminishing his appreciation for the craftsmanship involved. Been playing that song on constant rotation for about 43 years now, he noted, resuming his meticulous cleaning of already spotless glassware. After the second to last record failed, Billie Holiday, if you're curious, used to alternate between them until the grooves on hers wore beyond playability. This detail hinted at the profound isolation Joey must have experienced across decades, the same song repeating endlessly as sole musical accompaniment to centuries of existence. Yet he displayed no resentment toward this limitation, having apparently integrated it into his experience as thoroughly as Eleanor had adapted to the metro station's eternal announcements of trains that would never arrive. As if sensing this comparison in the Wanderer's thoughts, Joey continued. You develop different relationships with time when you've got an unlimited supply of it. First few decades after the change, I measured days obsessively, kept calendars, marked anniversaries, maintained schedules as though the world outside still operated on collective chronology. Eventually recognized the futility in that approach. He placed the polished glass precisely alongside its companions before selecting another. Now I operate on what you might call event time instead of clock time. One visitor to the next, one maintenance cycle to another, one song to the same song again, creates its own rhythm once you surrender to it. This philosophical perspective on extended existence offered insight into how ghouls who maintained their mental faculties managed the psychological burden of potential immortality within a radically altered world. Not merely enduring or surviving, but adapting their fundamental perception of experience to accommodate circumstances humans were never evolved to process. Conversation paused as Joey turned his attention to something beneath the counter, emerging with a plate holding what appeared to be preserved food of notably higher quality than typical wasteland fare. He placed this before the wanderer, with the same professional flourish he had demonstrated while serving water. "Sugar bombs with purified Brahmin milk," he explained. "Preserved food stocks remain one of our specialties, though the selection has diminished considerably over the centuries. Still, better than most alternatives available in the current environment." The offering represented significant generosity by Wasteland standards, where preserved pre-war food commanded premium trading value. The wanderer expressed appropriate appreciation, which Joey acknowledged with the comfortable wave of someone for whom hospitality remained natural, despite the collapse of social structures that had once formalized such exchanges. "Bar's been lucky with its visitors over the years," he explained, seemingly reading the unasked question about his willingness to share limited resources. "Most who find their way here respect what I'm maintaining. Those with abundance sometimes leave supplies in exchange for shelter or conversation. Creates a cycle that allows me to support those who arrive with greater need." As the wanderer sampled the unexpected meal, the cereal maintaining remarkable crispness despite its age, the Brahmin milk clearly recent and confirming connections with settlements capable of maintaining livestock, Joey continued sharing aspects of his extended barkeeping experience throughout the post-nuclear era. First few years were the most challenging, he recalled, arranging bottles with minute adjustments that suggested the activity provided comfort through familiarity. Survivors, desperate for resources, social constraints collapsed along with governance structures, had to defend the establishment regularly, kept a shotgun behind the counter even before the war, standard practice for rural hospitality businesses even in supposedly civilized times. Used it more in those initial months than during the previous decade of operation. His matter-of-fact description of wasteland origins carried the distance of someone relating history rather than trauma, time having transformed even these difficult experiences into merely another chapter in an exceptionally long narrative. The perspective suggested how differently such extended lifespan might process events that would define or destroy shorter-lived existences. Second and third decades saw the emergence of the first stable communities, Joey continued, his narrative providing context often lacking in more fragmentary wasteland histories. Patterns of cooperation developing alongside territorial conflicts, trade routes gradually establishing connections between isolated groups. The bar became a recognized neutral ground, a waypoint traders could use for shelter, eventually a meeting place for representatives from different factions who needed neutral territory for negotiations. These reflections on the capital wasteland's developmental stages offered valuable historical perspective. Joey's consistent position providing continuity of observation, often lacking in accounts assembled from multiple fragmented sources. The wanderer asked occasional questions that prompted more specific details about regional evolution, how certain settlements had formed and dissolved, which trade routes had proven sustainable across decades. how faction territories had shifted through generations of conflict and cooperation. Throughout this exchange, the jukebox continued its endless repetition of the single surviving song, creating a soundtrack that somehow never became intrusive despite its constant presence. Joey occasionally glanced toward the machine when its mechanical components produced slightly different sounds during particular transitions, his expression suggesting the attentive concern of someone monitoring a patient with chronic but stable condition. "Care for a game?" he asked eventually, gesturing toward the pool table that stood ready in the bar's central area. "Been a while since I've had a worthy opponent. Most visitors these days are more focused on immediate survival concerns than recreational pastimes." The invitation represented more than mere diversion, a gesture toward normalcy rarely encountered in Wasteland interactions, where relationships typically centered around resource exchange or mutual protection rather than shared enjoyment. The wanderer accepted with appropriate appreciation for both the offer itself and its underlying significance. Joey selected 2 cue sticks from a rack mounted on the wall, examining each with professional assessment before offering the straighter specimen to his visitor. He proceeded to rack the balls with practiced precision, each positioned with minute adjustments until the formation met his exacting standards. These preparations carried the ceremony of activities that had transcended mere habit to become ritual, their careful execution maintaining connection with protocols established in the world before. "Traditional 8-ball rules," he announced, applying chalk to his Q-tip with methodical attention. "Though I've always preferred call shot guidelines to slop allowances. Maintains the skill element that elevates the game beyond mere luck." The match that followed proved surprisingly competitive, the wanderer demonstrating familiarity with the game, likely acquired during extended stays in larger settlements where such recreational options occasionally existed. Joey displaying the refined technique of someone who had practiced the same activity across decades. Their play unfolded with comfortable rhythm, conversation flowing naturally between shots as they navigated both the strategic challenges of the game and the continued exchange of experiences and observations. "Remarkable coincidence," Joey noted as he studied a particularly challenging configuration of balls following the Wanderer's previous shot. Or perhaps not coincidence at all, given the limited routes through this region. "But I recently hosted another visitor who mentioned encounters remarkably similar to those you've described." He proceeded to describe a trader who had passed through approximately 2 months earlier, whose journey had included interactions with both Nathaniel's rooftop garden and Eleanor's metro station vigil. The specific details matched the Wanderer's own experiences closely enough to confirm they referenced the same locations rather than merely similar wasteland phenomena. "Connections forming and reforming," Joey observed as he successfully executed a difficult bank shot. "One of the more hopeful developments I've witnessed over the decades. Not just survival or scavenging, but actual networks developing, knowledge shared, skills taught, purposes aligned, different approaches to preservation like Nathaniel's and Eleanor's, creating complementary contributions to whatever emerges from this extended transition period." This perspective, viewing the current wasteland not merely as fallen civilization but as transitional phase between societal forms, revealed Joe's exceptionally long-term thinking, informed by having already witnessed multiple generations of human adaptation since the nuclear devastation. Where shorter-lived wasteland inhabitants might perceive only immediate conditions, his extended observation enabled recognition of gradual patterns emerging across decades. As their game approached its conclusion, Joey demonstrating particular skill with strategic ball placement that created favorable opportunities for subsequent shots, he shared additional philosophical reflections that further illuminated his unique perspective on wasteland existence. "I've often thought there's something instructive about this jukebox," he said, nodding toward the machine as it continued its eternal repetition of the same melody. One song remaining when hundreds once existed, limited options where abundance once prevailed. Yet that single remaining track still performs its essential function, creating atmosphere, providing rhythm, maintaining connection to cultural forms otherwise lost. Quality of experience altered, but fundamental purpose preserved. He lined up the final shot that would secure his victory, executing it with the casual precision of long practice. Perhaps that's the best any of us can hope for in this altered world, to preserve some essential function or purpose, even when external forms and conditions have been radically transformed. To remain recognizably ourselves, despite circumstances that might reasonably have destroyed identity entirely. This philosophical framework seemed to explain Joey's dedication to maintaining not just the physical bar, but its functional purpose as gathering place, neutral territory, and embodiment of hospitality protocols established in the civilization that had been lost. Not mere nostalgia or denial of changed reality, but deliberate preservation of values and functions he deemed worth continuing despite their original context having disappeared. With the game concluded, they returned to the bar, where Joey produced another round of purified water, accompanied by a small portion of preserved dessert, a sweet confection that had maintained surprising textural integrity despite its age. As they enjoyed this unexpected luxury, the jukebox completed another cycle of its single song before beginning again from the opening notes. "You're welcome to shelter here for the night," Joey offered, as twilight deepened toward true darkness outside the bar's windows. "Safer than continuing after dark, and I maintain secure sleeping accommodations for trustworthy travelers. Couch in the back room has supported countless weary visitors over the decades." The invitation represented significant trust in Wasteland terms, where secure sleeping locations remained among the most valuable resources. The wanderer accepted with appropriate appreciation, recognizing both the practical value and the social significance of being granted access to Joey's carefully maintained sanctuary. As evening transitioned into night proper, the bar's atmosphere shifted subtly. Exterior darkness increasing the contrast with the warm illumination within, creating an enhanced sense of sanctuary against the wasteland's harsher realities. Joey maintained his professional demeanor while gradually sharing more personal reflections on his extended existence, each narrative providing unique perspective on historical events, often known to the wanderer only through fragmented secondary accounts. He described witnessing the initial formation of the Brotherhood of Steel's presence in the capital Wasteland, the emergence and dissolution of various raider confederations as leadership changed across generations, the gradual shifts in mutated wildlife territories as adaptation continued across decades. Throughout, his perspective remained remarkably balanced, neither idealizing the past nor dismissing the potential for improved future conditions, maintaining the measured assessment of someone whose observations span sufficient time to recognize patterns beyond immediate circumstance. "Seen enough cycles to recognize recurrence," he noted, while arranging bottles in precise alignment behind the counter, the activity seemingly providing comfort through familiarity. Periods of increased cooperation followed by territorial conflicts, technological rediscovery balanced against resource scarcity, visionary leadership eventually yielding to pragmatic compromise or ideological rigidity. Perspectives shift when you've watched several human generations navigate the same fundamental challenges under different specific conditions. The philosophical insight carried the weight of direct observation rather than mere theoretical consideration, Joey's unique position having allowed him to witness multiple iterations of Wasteland societal development from his consistent vantage point. Like Eleanor's historical preservation and Nathaniel's botanical continuity, his contribution to post-nuclear human understanding represented something that only ghoul longevity could provide: direct experiential connection between world stages that would otherwise remain separated by mortality's limitations. As night deepened, Joey directed the Wanderer toward the promised sleeping arrangements, a back room maintained with the same meticulous attention evident throughout the establishment, containing a couch that, while clearly assembled from pre-war components, had been recovered and maintained with remarkable care. Clean bedding awaited, alongside a small table holding purified water and reading materials, selected from the bar's modest collection of surviving books. "Rest well," Joey advised, his professional demeanor momentarily softening to reveal genuine concern for his visitor's comfort. Bars secured against typical wasteland threats, reinforced entry points, alternative exits if needed, alarm systems that have proven reliable across decades of occasional unwanted attention. You're as safe here as anywhere in the capital wasteland. With these assurances and a final exchange of respectful acknowledgement, Joey returned to his eternal bartending duties, polishing, arranging, maintaining the immaculate condition that defined his establishment as something beyond mere survival shelter. The jukebox continued its endless repetition of the single remaining song, its melody now almost subliminal after hours of continuous playback, transformed from specific music into general atmospheric continuity. Sleep came with unexpected ease, the combination of genuine security and the subtle comfort of human connection creating conditions rarely experienced during wasteland travels. The Wanderer's consciousness drifted gradually, rather than shutting down with the immediate transition typically necessitated by more exposed resting conditions, allowing appreciation for the remarkable sanctuary Joey had maintained against all probability across nuclear devastation and its centuries-long aftermath. Morning arrived with gentle transition rather than abrupt alertness, sunlight filtering through windows that had somehow maintained structural integrity despite 2 centuries of exposure to wasteland conditions. The jukebox continued its eternal repetition, suggesting it had played continuously through the night hours. The same melody that had likely accompanied untold nights of Joey's extended vigil within his preserved domain. The bar's proprietor was already active when the Wanderer emerged from the back room, his movements suggesting the comfortable routine of someone who had established precise patterns across decades of consistent purpose. He acknowledged his guest with professional courtesy while completing his morning preparation rituals, each action executed with the meticulous attention that characterized his entire operation. "Coffee's just about ready," he announced, indicating a pot of what appeared to be the genuine pre-war beverage rather than the various wasteland substitutes typically encountered elsewhere. Maintained a sealed supply from the original inventory, rationalized consumption to extend availability across centuries, still have perhaps 2 years' worth at current serving rates, assuming visitor frequency remains consistent with recent patterns. This remarkable long-term resource management, extending what must have been relatively limited initial supplies across centuries through careful rationing, exemplified Joey's unique relationship with time and scarcity. Where most wasteland inhabitants operated within frameworks of immediate need or short-term planning, his perspective encompassed decades of projected requirements and distribution schedules. The coffee, when served in meticulously cleaned pre-war mugs, proved exceptional by any standard, its aroma and flavor preserved through whatever specialized storage methods Joey had maintained throughout the post-nuclear decades. The Wanderer expressed appropriate appreciation, which Joey acknowledged with the professional satisfaction of someone whose craft remained recognized despite the collapse of the civilization that had once formalized such exchanges. As they shared this morning ritual, conversation turned toward practical matters of the journey ahead, Joey providing detailed information about current conditions along potential routes, drawing from reports shared by previous visitors to create composite understanding of regional hazards and opportunities. His knowledge proved remarkably current, despite his stationary position, evidence of systematic information collection from diverse sources passing through his establishment. Vaders have established new checkpoint near the river crossing, he advised, indicating the location on the Wanderer's Pip-Boy map. Small group, opportunistic rather than aggressive when faced with capable opposition. Southern alternative adds approximately 4 miles, but bypasses their territory entirely, connecting with the main approach to your destination through more manageable terrain. This specific guidance, clearly informed by multiple consistent reports from recent travelers, represented the practical value Joey provided to Wasteland navigation beyond his establishment's function as secure shelter. The detailed routing suggestions reflected not merely geographical knowledge, but understanding of faction behaviors and seasonal wildlife patterns, contextual intelligence that could prove as valuable as physical resources for successful wasteland traversal. With morning advancing and the day's journey awaiting, the Wanderer began preparations for departure. Equipment checked and secured, supplies organized for efficient access during travel, route information reviewed and integrated with existing knowledge. Throughout these preparations, Joey maintained his professional demeanor while adding occasional suggestions based on extensive observation of traveler requirements over decades of hosting Wasteland visitors. As the Wanderer prepared to depart, Joey presented a small package wrapped in preserved cloth. "For your journey," he explained, offering the bundle. "Purified water and preserved food sufficient for a day's travel. Path ahead includes limited reliable resource sources until you reach the river junction." The gift represented the continuation of Wasteland reciprocity, resources exchanged for less tangible values like companionship, information, or merely the opportunity to fulfill one's chosen purpose. The Wanderer accepted with appreciation, recognizing the underlying social contract being honored rather than merely the practical value of the supplies themselves. Joey accompanied his visitor to the bar's entrance, pausing at the threshold as though rarely venturing beyond this boundary between his preserved domain and the wasteland beyond. The morning light cast different quality of illumination across the establishment than had been visible during the previous evening's approach, details emerging with clarity that reinforced the remarkable preservation Joey had maintained against overwhelming entropic pressures. "You're welcome to return whenever your travels bring you this way," he offered with the formal hospitality that had clearly defined his professional identity across centuries. "Bar remains open, continuous operation, as it has since before the war. Policy unchanged, despite altered circumstances. This commitment to operational continuity, despite the collapse of the civilization that had established its original context, represented another expression of the same fundamental quality evident in Nathaniel's rooftop garden, Eleanor's metro station vigil, and Ellis's lighthouse maintenance. Determination to preserve purpose and function against forces that might reasonably have rendered such persistence impossible. With final farewells exchanged, the Wanderer departed Joey's establishment, boots finding rhythm once more on the broken asphalt of what had once been a secondary highway serving now vanished communities. Behind, the bar stood, as it had for centuries, an improbable sanctuary of preservation amid general dissolution, maintained through one individual's dedication to purpose that transcended mere survival. As distance increased, the sound of the jukebox gradually faded from audible range, the melody that had provided continuous soundtrack throughout the encounter, returning to its eternal repetition without audience. Joey would continue his meticulous maintenance of glasses already clean, arrangement of bottles in perfect alignment, preservation of hospitality protocols when no guests were present to receive them. Activities that might appear meaningless to casual observation, but represented essential continuity of purpose across nuclear devastation and its aftermath. The wasteland stretched ahead, vast and dangerous, yet also containing such unexpected pockets of preservation and meaning for those willing to look beyond immediate appearances. Somewhere in the distance lay the next settlement. Other travelers moved between isolated outposts of civilization. Others, like Joey, maintained their own specialized functions that contributed to humanity's tenuous foothold in this harsh new world. The journey continued under the wasteland's sun, boots raising small clouds of dust from the broken highway, each step carrying forward not just physical progress, but awareness of connections maintained between past and present, between isolated individuals dedicated to purposes larger than themselves, between fragments of a world struggling to reassemble some new coherence from the broken pieces of the old. Thanks for wandering the wasteland with me tonight. If these stories helped you relax, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. For uninterrupted sleep, these videos play straight through without ads, letting the sounds of the wasteland guide you all night long. If you want more, check out our Patreon for early access and exclusive Spotify playlists. Link in the description. Sleep well, fellow vault dwellers. May your dreams be peaceful and your nights raid-free. Good night.